Well, a couple weeks ago, I had the pleasure of talking with Casey Dorman, author of Is God Really Necessary? A Glimpse into the Mind of an Atheist. And I had a good time, and I felt like it was a fruitful discussion, so he was kind enough to join us again today. So thank you, Casey. Good to have you with us today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. So last week, our focus was on, generally speaking, morality. And specifically, Casey was arguing for the view that our sense of morality is essentially the product of evolution, followed up by then the influence of culture, essentially shaping what we understand to be right and wrong. And where we agreed in the previous video was that yes, we do have an innate understanding that human beings have what you could call the conscience, or what in Romans Paul speaks of the law written on the heart, that it's a sense of some things are right and some things are wrong. So we agreed on that point. And our point of disagreement that we were able to talk about in our previous video was the question of whether that sense of right and wrong, which we agree we share, whether it can correspond to anything actually being truly right or truly wrong from a atheistic worldview, whether that allows things to actually be right or wrong, and whether that's even the correct category to bring to the question. So you can go view that video elsewhere on my YouTube channel. But for today, Casey sent me another question that I thought was well worth discussing, sort of somewhat flowing out of the topic of morality, and I think some of the same issues will come up potentially, which is why I spent a little time reviewing. But Casey, if you want to start us off, if you would, just generally, what is your general question for me to start us off?
Okay. After we had our discussion, it seemed to me that one of the things that you were saying, which you reiterated today, is that you felt that human beings had some moral, I don't know if I should say rules, but certainly moral sentiments, as you said, written on the heart, but given to us by God. And my argument was they're given to us genetically through evolution and through culture. Since I'm an atheist and don't believe in God. But one of and we talked about we generally agreed on, I think, on a number of the moral dimensions, the virtues and so forth. So there wasn't too much disagreement between you and I on that. However, in religion, or at least in the Judaism, Islam, and Christian, the biblical religions, one of the primary focuses of the religion is belief in a single God. In fact, belief in the correct single God. People who didn't believe in that, for instance, if they constructed a golden calf and decided to worship that, were killed in the Old Testament.
Sure.
There were wars fought between different tribes, with the Hebrews usually winning because God was on their side, and the other tribes worshiping another God. And that was one of the reasons the war occurred, is because they did not worship the correct God. And even in Christianity, it seems to me that a kind of fundamental belief is that the only way for you to gain salvation or, arrive in heaven after you die or whatever happens that's good is through belief in that Jesus is there is only one God. He's the one in the Bible, and Jesus is his son, and or him, however that actually works. So I have two questions. Number one is, since that seems so central to virtually all the biblical religions, is that a moral principle in your mind? And number two, if it is a moral principle, looking back historically and beyond the Middle East or Europe after some of these religions reached Europe, there are many, probably historically the largest period of human existence didn't contain a belief in one God. And even when religions were developed, which is very back into pre-modern times, ancient religions, they tended to be polytheistic, belief in many gods. Sometimes I learned a new word in researching this called henotheistic, which means you believe in many gods, but your God is better than the other God.
Of course.
And in fact, there are some people who think that some of the early books of the Bible express that kind of point of view, that even the commandment, thou shalt worship no other gods before me, kind of implies that, well, maybe there are some other gods, but they're not as good as I am.
In fact, I've heard Mormons sometimes make that case, depending on their flavor. Yes.
Yes, they do. So if belief if it's a moral virtue to believe in the correct God, and only the correct God, and that no other gods exist, and if moral virtues are given to us by God, how do you explain so much of the history of humanity as having no concept such as this? That's essentially my question.
Excellent. Well, I'll explain that in 30 seconds, then we can move on. So yeah, obviously a lot to unpack there. So kind of starting, I guess I would say that there's maybe two things that would be helpful to clarify right off the bat, kind of going to your question, sort of your first question, as to if as I have argued, that God has written his moral law on our heart, call it conscience, what have you. If that is true, and if it is also morally good to believe in the true God, which I would also agree, I would so stipulate that, then why, through most of human history, have most people not believed in the one true God? So going to that question, I guess I would start by, if I could kind of clarify how I would understand the idea of believing in the one true God. And that would be that we should think of it, because that's how the Bible presents it, as not being a matter of, academic assent. Not a matter of, check, I have this understanding, there's one moon orbits the earth, there's a sun at the center of the solar system, and there's one God. So it's not presented in that sort of, academic knowledge for the sake of knowledge sense. In fact, as I was thinking about this question that I knew was coming, I actually was reminded, if I may, I promise not to turn this into a sermon replete with scripture references, but there is, I think, actually a very significant to this question Bible verse in James 2, where James writes, "You believe that God is one. You do well. The demons also believe and shudder." He carries on, but are you willing to recognize, you foolish fellow, that faith without works is useless? The point being that, mere academic knowledge of, yes, there is a God, that's not what Christianity, not what Judaism is looking for. I can't speak as much to Islam. Of course, that's not my burden today, is to defend that, and I wouldn't. I think my understanding is that in some ways, Islam does almost have more of just again, you must believe in the fact of monotheism for its own sake. But in Christianity, the burden of monotheistic belief is on, right relationship with that one true God. Think of it as if I have some sort of plague, some sort of illness, and I need some sort of cure. Let's say I'm part of a tribe, and the tribe is trying to figure out what do we do about smallpox that's hit or whatever. If the medical doctor comes, he's going to very urgently say, this inoculation, this is the way. Don't smear that on yourself. Don't go and do whatever else you may think is the way to cure the smallpox. But this is it. And the point is not, as an academic matter, I want you to have this conviction, like in medical school, this is the way to go. But no, this is what's going to save your life, is how he's presenting it, and how he would be thinking of it. So the biblical presentation of monotheism is of, you are in desperate condition. You are in need of a savior. And the way to the savior is this God with this designated savior. So that would be the first thing I would say, is just clarifying, my understanding of what we mean by monotheism being a virtue. That is, go ahead.
Yeah, and is that, because you're talking about in the New Testament, is that in your mind a revision of the way it's presented in the Old Testament? Because, for example, when Moses came down from the mount with the tablets and found that his followers had melted their jewelry into a golden calf, he didn't ask what else they had done. He didn't ask whether they had honored their mothers or their fathers, whether they had taken out the garbage. They didn't ask whether they had done saved people's lives or anything like that. It was just the fact that they worshiped the wrong God by itself that led to them being slaughtered.
Absolutely, and I do agree on that point. Though where I would say that that's not actually contrary to what I'm saying, as far as this is the reason that the worship of the one true God, the reason it's important, is as a means of salvation. In fact, it's interesting if we tend to think that, once they come out of the desert and go into the promised land, and of course there's a great deal of conflict and there's some slaughter, etc., of the inhabitants of that land. But it's interesting, a few things. First of all, just on the point of the clearing of the land, the slaughter of the Canaanites, I would just add sort of an interesting tidbit, that we're told that God sent Abraham away from the promised land for 400 years because he said the sin of the Canaanites is not yet full, that essentially I'm not ready to punish them yet. And then when it comes, it's not an act of genocide in the sense that we would understand it. It's an act of God's punishment on a people for sin, which then comes back to that question of why is worship of the one true God significant. And it's interesting, as they come into the land, you actually have multiple examples, and this is really throughout the Old Testament, multiple examples of outsiders, Gentiles, who come into Israel and worship the true God, Yahweh, and are then, as soon as that's the case, they're protected, they're considered His people as well. Not again because there were certain more or less monotheistic views elsewhere in the world, and those were on the outside. The question is, are you worshiping the only God who actually exists and the only God who's able to save, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament? Same dynamic at work.
So doesn't that sort of say what I just said, which is that it really is the crucial issue is, are you worshiping the correct God in the Old Testament, not are your other works moral in any way?
Well, I think... I'm sorry.
Again, even when he killed his own followers and it looks like I reread that to kind of check did I have my facts straight. And that Aaron, who seemed to be the one who told them to melt their jewelry, escaped scot-free from this thing. But the people who followed what he said, the people who were lost and said, we don't even know whether Moses is going to come back, for maybe he's dead for all we know. They didn't do anything else wrong. At least there's no. They only did this, and yet they were killed because they did that. So the Old Testament version seems to be, despite the fact that there are all these rules you do have to follow, most of which today I don't think people would call moral. They wouldn't say, well, yes, it really is more moral not to eat pig than to eat pig. They would say, well, that's something from the Old Testament, but I'll eat my bacon and I'm still a moral person.
I like bacon, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there were lots of rules to follow, but he didn't even check whether they did that. And in fact, most of those rules hadn't been given yet at that point. But that Old Testament version is not putting works ahead of faith. It's putting not even faith, I'd say worship. Worship as the central moral theme of the book. So it seems as though the New Testament version, in fact, I've always regarded the New Testament as setting aside some of these rules for a different perspective. Now that perspective, though, that if we go on to that perspective, which is it isn't just faith, it's your works, also are works without faith redeeming enough to get whatever it is you're supposed to get if you're a Christian, or must you need the faith also?
I'm mentally organizing my response. So yes, excellent.
I said, once I get going, I'm afraid I just keep going.
Very good, very good. So I guess, first of all, I would see much less discontinuity between Old and New Testament on this point. So I do actually agree with you that absolutely the Israelites at the incident of the golden calf and in other times, they and then others from other cultures were punished. They were portrayed as sinning specifically and only because of failing to worship the one true God. Definitely. Now, I think it's interesting. I was trying to track trying to see where I wasn't communicating, and I think I got it in the last bit of what you said about in the New Testament. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but essentially more of a salvation through being a good person or something like that. Is that a fair summary of what you were seeing in the New Testament?
No.
Okay.
No. I was saying that the one thing that I see in the New Testament is to say, the letter of the law is not so important as the spirit of the law. And that would seem to be one of Jesus' messages as he continually was criticized for not obeying the letter of the law, or eating with, sitting beside, forgiving, or whatever people who didn't obey the letter of the law. And he would reiterate that it's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. So that's the perspective, because the Old Testament I see as a very letter of the law kind of document. But I was responding to your statement from James that it's faith plus works.
Yes.
That brings you salvation. And I was wondering, it's easy to see, I think, people who have works with no faith. And does that mean that those are like two equal, either way, or you need both?
Gotcha. This is the danger of reading one more verse than I should have to make my point. So I've opened up an entire new can of worms. So what I would say briefly is what James is saying more broadly in that passage is that the sign of real faith is works. So he says, show me. I'm paraphrasing, but you say you have faith and no works. Well, show me your faith by your works. So he's not separating the two, but saying that the one is the evidence of the other. As Jesus says elsewhere, you know the tree by its fruit, kind of an idea. So yes, I would absolutely say that faith is an absolute prerequisite, is the prerequisite for salvation in Old Testament and New Testament. Actually, is belief in we could spend an entire hour just defining what faith means, biblically. But loosely speaking, belief in, trust in, following of, worship of God, including His Son, Jesus Christ. So that would be then the means of salvation, or the path of salvation in both Testaments. And
so would you say then that if you had two people who behaved essentially identically in terms of how they treated other people, how they treated the environment, how they respected their own bodies, whatever it is you want to throw into virtuous behavior, but one did it on the basis of their faith and the other one did it not on the basis of any faith, but did it out of whatever rational reasons they came up with, or even a whole history of philosophy, say in a different non-theistic tradition like Buddhism or something like that. Would you say that then one of them achieves in your religion salvation, but the other one does not?
Beautiful question. I love a clarifying question. Yeah, that really gets to the heart of it. Yes, but I think is my answer. The Bible in both Testaments is plain that as Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And in fact, elsewhere in the New Testament, it speaks of those in the Old Testament, Abraham, Noah, etc., that they were ultimately saved through faith as well. And sort of the classic discussion of this is in the first few chapters of Romans. And the message that Romans carries is that essentially, well, I say message of Romans, message of the Bible, but it's just distilled well in Romans, is that we are in bad enough shape because of sin that yes, there are people who do better than others. There are people who try to follow the rules, and there's people who don't even bother. But that even the best of us, in comparison to a holy God, is in a position of you cannot win your way into his favor. Which, incidentally, since you mentioned other major monotheistic religions, would be different from, say, the Islamic view, where in Islam, essentially, you just try to be as good as possible, and if you're good enough, kind of Allah weighs the scales, and if you're good enough, you get in. So this is a unique understanding in Christianity, is basically that all are condemned as far as our own efforts, our own works. In fact, actually, there's a verse in Romans which I think just distills this well. So in Romans, Romans 3:20, I believe. There we go. Romans 3:20, because by the works of the law no flesh will be justified in his sight, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin. So the picture is, whether you're a Jew who got the law, whether you're a Gentile on the other side of the world who didn't, it doesn't really make a difference in terms of whether you can do well enough to please God. The message is you can't. And it's the dilemma, essentially, of of incompatible natures that just like if a snowman falls in love with the sun, they're going to have some problems in their relationship. That essentially what the picture the Scripture offers is that even the best of us is not good enough in ourselves, and therefore that's why faith is so critically important. In fact, if it wasn't for that, we could throw out the whole Bible. Jesus could stay up in heaven. Just listen to Aristotle or Buddha or Confucius or whoever, and they've got pretty good suggestions. They've got good directions. Look to the law written on your heart. Try and be a good person. But the problem with that approach is it simply won't work, and therefore what the Bible would say is that what the sacrificial system in the Old Testament pointed to is that ultimately you need something which is able to simultaneously wipe away the guilt for every bad thought, every selfish behavior, everything that you have done over a lifetime of putting yourself first sometimes, not caring for others sometimes, every time you trash the environment, those the things that we all do, that they are disgusting, evil, wicked, fill in your adjective of choice, enough before a holy God that he says, I cannot approve you, I cannot bring you into my presence ultimately. But the most beautiful, caveat, the most beautiful but in the Bible, but I've got an answer, which is then, I'm going to send my son. He will simultaneously pay the price for sins, and also then his righteousness would be imputed to you. And that is why the faith is so important. That is why belief is so important, because essentially what you're doing is that you're accepting the offer of a righteousness which you don't have in yourself. So I've gone on for a bit. I don't know if you have.
So, well, that all is within the Christian faith in terms of attaining salvation.
Right.
So, in terms of which of course an atheist is not all that concerned with.
Certainly.
but I take it that, but again, in a moral sense of what is right and what is wrong, I take it that means then that faith is itself a virtue, in the sense that a person who has the faith is, in some sense, in your mind or in a Christian mind, a better person than someone who does not.
No, actually, I'm trying to think how if I would phrase it that way. And I think really I was with you until the word better, in the sense that no, faith is not meritorious. It's not something that, God is like, man, I hate you, but dude, you have amazing faith, so I'll let you in. Kind of, that's not the picture. But instead, that faith is, it's the vaccination, it's the rope that pulls you out of, however you want to think of it, that it's essentially just a matter of believing, accepting, and taking the offer of salvation. So it's more of a factual kind of thing of just, this is the offer that was made, and I accept, by God's work in me, I'm able to appropriate, then yes, I believe. But it wouldn't be something that makes somebody better per se. I don't know if that's muddied things or clarified.
Well, I'm not sure. So, but if I follow you, then it is. You could say of two people, if your judgment of what is better is someone who followed moral rules, let's leave out the rule that you have to have faith in that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Let's leave that one out. But all other moral rules, if one of them followed them more than another person, you would be able to say, well, that person who is not a Christian and who does not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, or does not even believe in God at all, is a better person than that person who does believe have the faith. You would be open to saying that.
It really depends what you mean by the word better. In the sense of, yes, there are I'm sorry?
More moral.
Right, yes. So yeah, I would say that there are, well, let's just, the classic example would be, the thief on the cross, the story, from when Jesus is crucified. You've got this thief who, let's just say, is a absolutely horrible person. And he's being, killed for crimes. Let's say he did all the crimes and he did a whole bunch of other crimes that, people don't know about. And then you've got somebody else who's, a good, decent person, tried to love his neighbor, he pays his taxes, he doesn't litter, big things, small things. That yes, from a perspective of, moral analysis in terms of who has followed the law written on your heart, or the law that you've heard from moral teachers or wherever, who has followed that law more closely, the answer would be yes. The person who theoretically doesn't have saving faith may have followed it more closely. What the Bible would add to that is neither one of them has followed it closely enough to save them, which is why both the thief and the other person need to say, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. The sort of the classic prayer of repentance.
But the thief only did, that's all he actually did, if I recall.
And then he died.
He died, but Jesus said, you'll be on my right hand when I get in heaven. So he made it on a single statement, essentially.
Yeah.
Despite presumably a life of immorality, or at least with elements of immorality in it, which got him in thievery for one, which virtually all moral systems regard as wrong. So, in that sense, doesn't it mean that you've now constructed a God who allows worse people into his heaven and denies better people from coming in based upon the issue of faith, based upon the issue of worship?
Yes. That essentially and worship,
well, I'm going back to the Old Testament when I say that, because faith will leave that as a New Testament concept. Right.
Well, I would quibble with that a little bit, but yeah, just the idea of following. Let's just, following the God, and accepting, accepting his means of salvation, whatever that would be in Old and New Testament. So yes, fundamentally, and I think what's this is the outrage of the gospel. This is the thing that feels like that's not fair, and the ultimate answer would be that if a single one of us is going to get into right relationship with God, that the only way it can come is as a gift. That I'm not good enough, you're not good enough, Mother Teresa wasn't good enough, Gandhi wasn't good enough, the thief on the cross wasn't good enough, that if we are going to be in a place of relating rightly to a God who is perfectly holy, which is something, it's like a fish trying to imagine what it's like to fly. We're just not that sort of thing to even conceive of that. But if there is this God who's perfectly holy, and, just tally up I assume you sound like a moral, decent person. But, just tally up, sit back and write out, all the things you're ashamed of, all the things that you shouldn't have done over however many years. And that pile is enough. I'm younger and I don't have time either. And essentially what the gospel says is, look, God looks down and says, I see you, I see the thief on the cross, I see David Vogel, and I look at all of them and say, you're out of luck getting to me, so I come to you. I offer this gift, which is a gift, and you look at it and you're like, dude, how can the thief on the cross, who again, hypothetically, we don't know anything about him, but let's just say he is a horrible person. And then you have this other person who is a better person, morally speaking. And what God says is he looks down, he's like, what a tragedy. Neither of these can come to me. Neither of these are good enough that they can walk up to me with confidence and say, hey, Lord, I'm here. let me in. And so because of that, I make the same offer to both of them, which is, here's the way. I will take you up. I will cleanse you of your sin. I will make you right with me. It's a different way of, essentially the avenue of earn your way there is a dead end. And so that's the beauty of the I am the way. People often hear that phrase from Jesus as, well, I'm closing off all the other ways. You can't come here, you can't come here, you can't come here. But no, he's saying that there was no way at all, and now this is how you can come to me if you will follow this path. And the thief did, and he got the gift as anybody could.
Okay, and if you will both agree, since we probably neither one of us regard ourselves as monumentally bad people.
Sure.
We're average, okay?
Fair enough.
The religious point of view that you put forward, I think, then says that faith is important. Nobody's going to be moral in an absolute sense.
Exactly.
With or without faith.
Yes.
Okay. So, so somebody's got to get into heaven, right?
One hopes. Yes.
So whoever gets into heaven is going to be imperfect. I think, right?
Well, on the way in or once they're there, I would qualify.
Well, on the way in.
Then yes, I would agree.
When they're knocking on the door.
Right. Indeed.
Okay, when they're knocking on the door, they're going to be imperfect. When their life on earth has been examined, it will be an imperfect life. It will not be a morally perfect life. But those people, and very conceivably, a person, and there will be among all people, it's on a gradient. There are some people who are more moral, for whatever rules we have for morality, than are others, okay? And there will be some people who are more moral but lack faith, and some people who are less moral but have faith, okay?
Agreed. Yeah.
And nobody's perfectly moral. Less moral but having faith theoretically could get you through the door. So now you've got a system in which the morality of the story of the Bible is that worse people in a moral sense, can get the ultimate reward than better people. And is that itself a moral? Can one take their morals from a religion that says that?
Again, I love your questions. Okay, so I guess there's a twofold answer I would give. The first answer is that what the Bible does, and if I may just read one more little snippet that I think does express it well. Romans deals with these sorts of questions at great length, and in Romans 2, Paul writes, "Therefore you have no excuse, every one of you who passes judgment. For in that which you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge practice the same things. And we know that the judgment of God rightly falls upon those who practice such things. But do you suppose this, O man, when you pass judgment on those who practice such things and do the same yourself, that you will escape the judgment of God?" And you mentioned, Jesus speaking of, you said, I think, sort of relaxing the letter of the law for the spirit of the law. And I would even disagree a little bit with that, in that I think Jesus, what he really said is, if you look properly at the law, you will find in the letter of the law the spirit of the law. He said that not a jot or tittle, tiny little punctuation marks, will pass away from the law until all is fulfilled. Right. And so, if you look at, say, the Sermon on the Mount, where he says things like, you know that you're not supposed to kill your brother. But actually, if you just feel hateful towards him, if you just, let me give a personal example. I was actually convicted by my conscience of this for a few days ago. I was driving and I'm going down the highway, 2-lane highway. There's a lane on the right where traffic's going really slowly, and lane on the left where it's, going speed limit, so I'm in the left. And this fellow jumps out in front of me and does like 10 miles below the speed limit for like 3 miles in the left-hand lane. I was not very happy with him. And, I zoomed past him when I could and didn't shoot him or anything, so I was, good self-control. But I realized afterwards, if you could do a heart examination of me right there, I don't know that my heart towards that fellow at that moment would have been that different from if I had just bludgeoned him to death. It sounds awful, but you think of just those ugly feelings that you have towards people at times. And so, Jesus is saying that, essentially the entire Bible is a presentation, it's really a factual presentation is how it presents itself, is a factual presentation of you have no hope in yourself. Whether you look good or you don't look good, and that's what Romans, the first chapters of Romans does, is he lays out, he's very systematic, he says, look, first you have how his audience would think of just the revolting, debauched pagans. People who are all kinds of idolatry, sexual sin, all kinds of stuff. You're disgusted by them. And yes, they're wrong with God. And then you have the more better Gentiles, the nobler Gentiles, the ones who try and that's where we have the bit about the law written on your heart. They know the right, they try to do right. Plato, Aristotle, whatever. And he says, and he lays out systematically those guys, and that's what I just read, ultimately you're as bad as the other. And then he comes to the Jews, and you can feel his Jewish audience going, oh yes. And you've just dealt with these perverse pagans. Now you come to us, and we've got the Bible, the Old Testament. We're good with God. And he says, no, actually, you've got the exact same problems. You have the law, and you break it. So the message of the Bible is ultimately, nobody's in shape to stand with confidence before God, and so it really is a different way of thinking, and there's actually a few parables that Jesus tells, kind of essentially saying, look, I get it. This sounds weird. He tells the parable of a bunch of laborers in a field where some people sign up at the beginning of the day and they work all the way through. And they get, I can't remember, $10, whatever. They get $10 for their work. And then there's somebody else who the owner hires 1 hour before closing time. And he also gets the same amount, $10. And Jesus is basically going, look, I know this doesn't feel fair. And the message is ultimately, you've got to put aside this idea of being good enough. And ultimately it's a matter of, there's got to be a different way. You've got to have this different route. So, to go back to
this route is faith.
This route is Christ, which is faith, which is accepting that God has put down a rope to you essentially because you can't get up to Him, and so that would be then the counter message. So yes, that's kind of my answer to the first part of your question, which was, am I saying that somebody can be better and not get into heaven, and somebody who's worse can? And yes, because the Bible redefines the ideas, tries to say, you need to think about this problem differently. So that's part one of the answer. Part two of the answer is that doesn't leave us without moral standards. That's where we come back to James and faith without works is dead. That's where you have Jesus in the New Testament in the Sermon on the Mount saying, look, you think that the law is hard to follow. Look, it's actually a whole lot more. You need to excise from yourself not only you can't kill the guy, but you can't hate him. You can't, not only you need to not have, commit adultery, you can't even lust after a woman, those sorts of things. And, John, one of the epistles of John says, if you say you're without sin, you're lying. So it doesn't say you've got to be following all these. But it does say if you are sons and daughters of your Father, you've got to pursue it. And, the Holy Spirit works in you to sanctify you, to make you better. So it doesn't just say, yeah, you're fine. But as long as you're on this earth, you must pursue holiness, is the second part of the answer. So it's not without morality, it's just first you get saved, and then the fruit of that is works.
So, what makes religion, the biblical religions, and let's say Christianity, what makes Christianity different than, suppose I read Immanuel Kant.
Yeah.
Who was a Christian, but I mean, it's hard to pick.
Categorical imperative and.
If you're Western, it's hard to pick a non-religious ethicist.
Sure.
Because most of the people that we study in philosophy lived in a time where everyone was a Christian or a Greek or a Greek. They're either a Christian or a Greek. Sure. But we can certainly go outside of that and go over to Asian religions or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are moral rules written in a number of different books.
Definitely.
And they're not all identical, but they have commonalities. And one takeaway I could take from what you just said was that the Bible contains some of these. It contains more of them perhaps in the New Testament than it does in the Old Testament, given the Old Testament is filled with so many rules, it's sort of hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, to borrow a biblical term, but its essential message is the message of redemption through faith. Okay? So if I were to say, well, I'm not particularly interested in redemption through faith. What I'm interested in is a moral guidance. There's no reason I would place biblical moral guidance above any other books of moral guidance or any other set of precepts, given that's not really the main message of the Bible. Is not, again, because you end up with this conundrum of the person who is more moral by whatever standards, but let's say the world standards, we're going to average all of the moral rules together, may not do as well, according to the Bible, as the person who is less moral but has faith combined with that. So in that sense, it's a story about how to get into heaven, more the New Testament, more than it's a story about how to live a moral life. And as a story of how to live a moral life, it doesn't actually stand above other stories of how to live a moral life. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I like it. I would largely agree with one quibble. I would say that personally one of my favorite ethicists is Aristotle. I think he had some amazing, great things to say. I think actually Buddha had some great things to say. Really good moral principles. I mean, you could pile up a list, and a lot of them say things that are largely similar to what the Bible would say. And in fact, C.S. Lewis, the famous Christian writer, said, if all you're looking for is instructions for how to be a good person, you don't need to crack open the Bible. There are plenty of other places to get that kind of instruction. Now, I would say, because I believe the Bible was written by God himself, the source of good, that your moral instruction will be better, that is included in the Bible, and that there are some points upon which the Bible can give greater clarity because that is direct from God. But then, in my view, of course, but going back to what we said a couple of weeks ago about the law written on our heart, as I would understand it, that yes, or even just sheer observation. I mean, that's a lot of what Aristotle did. Was he just watched and he was like, that person's living a better life than that person. They're happier, they're better off. It's maybe you should live like Bob, not like. So certainly there have been many people who have given basically similar moral principles to what the Bible offers. I would agree.
So that gets back to, is God really necessary? The title of my book, which I was not asking, is God necessary to get into heaven?
Right.
Since I'm an atheist, I don't believe in heaven, nor God. I was asking, is God really necessary to be a moral person? Does that mean you would agree? No, God is not necessary
Actually, I would answer, I guess, two things. First, yes, I would agree. I think there have been many moral people who did not follow, who will not be in heaven. People who did basically good things. And I guess my second answer would just be, I would urge that maybe that's the wrong question. That at least the answer of the Bible is that that's the wrong question. That we need something more than morality. That we should consider if there is a deeper problem that needs a deeper answer. But as far as morality, yes, I would concede that point, yes.
Okay. So, man, I hope you haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater here, because, but I think you and I might agree on that. That again, as a, if my concern is not what happens to my soul, because I don't believe in one, and my concern is not what happens to me after I die, because I think that nothing happens to me after I die, then I don't really need religion, because religion addresses those issues. It is not, I could, as C.S. Lewis said, not crack open the Bible and find suggestions, hints, and rules, and good discussions about how I might live my life in a way that I found satisfying, if to me satisfying is living a virtuous life.
Yes, I mean, as I listen to you say that, I feel like the analogy that springs to mind is somebody who has, AIDS and doesn't know it and goes into the doctor and says, doctor, I've been having this back pain and I'm hoping you could give me some good yoga routines. And the doctor says, well, actually we've run these tests and you have AIDS and there's this, or HIV, and there's this cure for it. We can treat it for you. And the person says, well, but what I really want is good yoga routines. And I say that with respect. I hear where you're coming from, and with your factual, if your facts are right, that you don't have a soul, that there is no God, etc., then I would absolutely agree with you that you don't particularly need. Again, I would say that the Bible does offer, on some things, better, more specific moral guidance. But no, it's not the only source for moral guidance. And if it's yoga routines we're looking for, then that's not what needs to be the sole source. I would agree.
And I concede, unlike I think a lot of atheists, but not all atheists. I think I said in my little book that I don't speak for there's probably no two atheists alike.
Of course.
Because atheism is a lack of belief.
Right.
Not believe in anything.
Right.
But I would concede that the New Testament, I had said before, I'm a little bit like Thomas Jefferson in that I think there are some good moral teachings in the New Testament, and you can remove the divine aspect of Christ and listen to what he said, because that's where most of them came from. I've never been sold on Paul. I think he didn't get rid of enough of the zealot in himself, and injected a lot of things in that didn't need to be injected, but turn the other cheek. Someone wants your coat, also give me your shirt. Yeah. Those kinds of things, none of which do I actually see in practice anywhere by religious people or not religious people. I think those are good moral rules. I think they can be found elsewhere, but they're stated in a very concise, clear way in relationship. I love the way they're stated often in relation. Those you who are without sin cast the first stone. Yeah. Where you've got the adultering woman about to be stoned, or if you're going to think about the I forget what the mote in your neighbor's eye, the beam in your eye. Those are he picks great. Whoever wrote it picked some rivaled Shakespeare, and Shakespeare had to borrow from it in order to get some of his best lines, in order to come up with really good scenarios for expressing what this moral lesson means in real life, what it would really do. And I like the New Testament for all those reasons. I just don't regard it as anything particularly divine or and again, the issues that you would be concerned about, salvation and your soul and so forth, are not issues for me. It does, and so the only thing then that I think left over is going back to the question of, what about all those other people who I read an interesting article by I can't remember what his name is, but a professor at the University of Southern California, and it was an article in a Journal of International Studies, and it was about it was like 2014, I think. It was a fairly recent article. It was saying there were no religious wars in pre-modern Asia, including Korea, China, Southeast Asia. There were wars for lots of reasons. Mm-hmm. People had religions, but they never fought wars on the basis of, my religion is better than your religion, or you're going to have to. The only way to end this war is if you agree you'll worship my God instead of your God. That just wasn't an issue to, probably, if you take all those Asian countries, majority. I'm not sure because we have Africa that had a lot of people in it, but a substantial segment of population for thousands of years did not argue about this, whose God is better than whose, and want and have a moral imperative to punish someone who didn't worship your God. So and that seems to be the message of the Old Testament anyway, and it's changed in the New Testament. Getting into heaven becomes the equivalent of putting somebody to death. You know, you don't get to go to heaven. It's the same as you get extinguished in some way. So I would have to conclude that belief of I have to worship the one single God as a moral belief is not something written in humanity's heart, because it just didn't exist for so long in so much of humanity.
Excellent. Yeah. So I guess the query is, does if we say that moral laws are written in people's hearts, and if the most important moral law is worship the one true God, then why doesn't that appear in most of history? And the ultimate, I guess the starting place I would take is that the idea of the law being written on our heart doesn't mean perfectly. That the theology of the fall in the Bible is very runs through everything. When God says, you will surely die, that doesn't mean, instantaneous, death, but that death enters the world, and that everything gets distorted, everything gets thrown out of whack. That's why, for example, you don't see those moral principles followed in most, in most people. So not only though is it a moral collapse, but it's even an epistemological collapse. It's, we don't even, we can't think as well, and we also can't think as well or know as well on moral questions. So, for example, I think we could agree that most cultures have a general prohibition on murder. Yet, we would agree that murder is in fact actually wrong. Yet, I'm not at all shocked, I'm not at all surprised that you find cannibalism, that you find murder, that you find, you can't murder him, but he's from another tribe, so go whack his head off. That's the result of the distorting effect of the fall on our moral sense, which is why then en route to the message of you need something else, you need a savior, you get God picking the Jews to say, look, I'm going to give you actually more specifically, I'll write it out, we'll call it 10, and here's 10 rules, and what Romans and elsewhere says is, those rules are designed for the purpose not to save you, but to make you realize you need salvation. And so the idea is, if you don't have that sort of clarity that comes from revelation from God, there's a much fuzzier picture. And so I think it's intriguing that you have almost no societies, and I know you can find maybe one or two, a few thinkers, but almost no societies that are atheistic. There is this assumption throughout history of goddishness through the world. And yes, it does usually end up being polytheism of some sort. But to me, that better fits the image of a distorted truth of a divine being. That you have a sense of goddishness, and then you're not quite sure what he looks like, what it's like. So, well, maybe that bush is God, and the tree is God, and fertility is God, etc. So you look for that thing which you don't fully know, would then work itself out in all the bizarre array of different religions, which I do find, again, somewhat less compatible with just pure atheism. Where did you get this idea of goddishness in so many societies throughout history? So that would be then, I guess, be my answer, is just that it's a distorted sense by the fall, by our sin, a distorted sense of there is a God, but I don't have a clear picture of him.
And because I do think there are, have been large segments. Certainly, polytheism has probably been more prevalent among, not in any historically, it's been more prevalent than monotheists.
Though, if I may just interject quickly, I do find it very interesting, though, that even in ostensibly polytheistic religions, and this goes back to my dream of God kind of idea, the sense of, there's something like Hinduism, the classic famous polytheist religion, is actually ultimately really more like monotheism, in that you trace it all back, you've got all the different manifestations of God, but ultimately it's all Brahman. And again, a lot of the Greek philosophers, it was a polytheistic culture, but the ones who were really thinking about religion, Plato, Aristotle, tended to trace it back to, they didn't know what, but something more singular. In fact, actually, as I recall, Plato actually even argued that logically there would have to be a singular God in three persons, and he had a logical development for why that would be. So I would suggest that even in polytheism, there's sort of a shadowy deity that's often, but not always, present behind the more local manifestations. But
and maybe I'm not enough an expert.
Sure. I'm not either, frankly, to make a very authoritative case. So
Buddhism and Confucianism, both, which have are generally thought of as non-theistic. They don't have a concept of a God, although Buddha talked about multiple gods sometimes.
Yeah.
And the Mesoamerican culture, the Mayans and the Incas and so forth, tended to have multiple gods that were even could be killed.
Yes, sure.
So they were the idea of God. People worship something, right?
Yeah. Oops, I killed God, but
even when you look at now I'm a fan of, and I'm sure you're not, Richard Dawkins, and Richard Dawkins in the God Delusion takes on the how would you explain from an evolutionary point of view,
right?
The tendency to be, and he agrees, there is what you just said. There's a tendency to be religious. I don't think he'd say there's a tendency toward monotheism, but he would say there's a tendency toward religious ritual or religious observance or something like that, or magical thinking or whatever he would call it. And again, and he can come up with a plausible evolutionary reason for it. Now, one of the things about evolution is that unless you're looking at fruit flies, it's virtually all speculation.
Right.
because you can't go back in time. You can only look at the results and speculate about evolution. And he admits, he cites other people's evolutionary theories of how, through group selection, through kin selection, through all different happenstance, whatever things. So there are. I would grant that it's hard to find cultures that didn't. Although I'm not so sure about, again, the Chinese. What the Chinese did is they made their emperors divine, which is and the Mesopotamians did that too. They made their kings became divine, but and kings fought kings, and emperors, were displaced by other people, but not because somebody said, I'm the true divine one. It was just, well, if I win, then I become the divine one, and you're not anymore. That kind of thing. So when you actually examine some of these beliefs, they're very, very different. They only may have in common the idea that there's something beyond what you see right in front of your eyes that's operative in the world.
Sure.
And maybe that's all they have in common. So, but it does, again, the strong insistence on a monotheistic belief, and maybe you could say, well, okay, throughout most of history, people got that wrong, but there are many, and sometimes they had an inkling of it, but there are lots of cultures where they didn't even seem to have an inkling of it, that nobody suggested, well, let's get rid of the jaguar god and the sun god and the fish god and the fly god and so forth and substitute single God. That's the real truth. And yet all those people were, in a biblical sense, created by God.
Sure.
Something written on their hearts and destined for something. Their soul something was gonna happen to it. So I'm not sure what happened to the souls of the people who believed in the jaguar god, and as a result, ripped out the hearts of other jaguar god believers who happened to belong to a different tribe. Yeah. And that was the norm.
Yeah.
That was the norm. They were behaving virtuously according to their culture. To me, looking at that the whole myriad picture of what has gone on in humanity makes the biblical account be a historically and locally specific story that doesn't seem to apply to a lot of the rest of humanity history of the world, other than the Middle East, and eventually, when it caught on, spread often by war. And the demand that you become a Muslim just like me, or you become a Christian just like me, or whatever. So that's another kind of adds fuel to my atheism, I guess, is to see the Bible and its stories as very, local, both historically and geographically.
Absolutely.
They probably don't agree, or I don't know, maybe you do agree.
Yeah, well, I do and I don't. So I think there is something intriguing in the localness of the Bible, in that it does make claims which are much more falsifiable than the claims of some. That if Jesus didn't actually live and die, etc., 2,000 years ago in Palestine, then throw the whole thing out as a bunch of hooey. And in fact, Paul actually literally says that in, I believe it's 1 Corinthians, where he's like, look, if he didn't die and rise again, we are of all men most to be pitied. Forget about being a Christian. So there is a very local sense to it. And I think my where I would differ from you a little bit, in this flavor of being local is, that it's expanding. Really throughout all of the Bible. You start with, for convenience, let's start with Abraham. So, Abraham gets picked by God to form a people. And that people, grow, they have a land, and even then, For example, in 1 Kings, when Solomon builds the temple, he gives this benedictory prayer, asking God to bless the temple in various ways. And there's this whole intriguing giant section where he's like, when other people come in to worship at the temple, Old Testament, when other Gentiles come in, accept them, hear their prayers. Again, the point is come to this God. But it's expanding somewhat even then. You have Canaanites who came in and followed God when the Jews entered the Promised Land, etc. And then you get to this local people through the Old Testament. And then you have a very local thing, a baby who's born in the New Testament. But then you have in Acts, you have this really cool little expansion in the early chapters of Acts, where first you have the Holy Spirit fall on his 12 followers, his 12 apostles. And then they're like, wow, this is amazing. New act of God, et cetera, et cetera. And then it goes out and they go to the Samaritans, who are like semi-Jews. So they're not quite as, historically it's sort of complicated how they became Samaritans, but they're sort of part of the people. And they're like, wow, blowing our mind, God's expanding it. And then go beyond the Samaritans, and Peter gets a revelation to go to Cornelius, who's a Gentile. And God says, go to them. It's for them as well. And again, there's, Psalms, for example, in the Old Testament speaks of this, but then you have the fulfillment of it in the New Testament of go to the Gentiles. Jesus in Matthew 28 says, go into all the earth, et cetera, et cetera. So from a picture of, or from a question of is the religion local? I would say it starts local and grows global, which I don't think fully answers your question or your objection, but I want you to
history before that, because
right,
because that would be it's growing in the future, but
what about the prior?
Yeah, we're in terms of humanity's existence on the face of the earth, we're a tiny portion of that.
So what about
I don't want to. I see the time, and I. This is a good discussion, and you have told me a lot. That one of the questions, and so maybe we do this a third time.
Sure, I'm game. I've enjoyed it.
Okay, because one of the things that brought up in terms of localness is the sticking to the morality issue, which I think is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Is how much of those rules are local to the time and the place, and because we can certainly look. It is just something to think about. But we know next time that we can look at a lot of those detailed little rules about what you do inside your tent and what you do outside your tent and blah, blah, blah. And in the Old Testament say, okay, we're not living in tents, we've got running water, we have antiseptics, we got, forget about all that, because that was local to the time, so it doesn't really mean anything. But we also have, in my mind, or in my perception, which is that, we have Jesus saying, turn the other cheek to your enemies. He doesn't modify that on your enemy Christians or your enemy, all enemies.
Absolutely.
Yet we have wars right up to this day being fought in his name. So I take it that somebody who does that, we have people wanting to restrict food stamps and welfare payments when you're supposed to give your shirt off your back if somebody wants your coat. So I take it that for someone to be a Christian and believe those things, they have to make some kind of judgment that he didn't really mean the situation we're in today. When he said, turn the other cheek and, don't fight your enemies, love your enemies. He didn't mean if they were Saudi Arabians with a bomb in their hand. So it raises the question, okay, if you're going to take what's in the Bible as a moral guide, your moral lighthouse, what obviously most people don't take it literally. They say, no, I can't follow that exactly the way he said. I've got to modify it. And so how much is modifiable, how much isn't, and what's the guidance for doing that?
I feel like this is the part in the TV show where you say, tune in next time. Yeah, no, that would be great. I would love to talk about that. I guess my short answer is none of it should be modifiable. With the exception of Old Testament, there were some things, in fact, going back to what I said about Peter being sent to Cornelius's house. There's actually a very significant passage there where essentially God himself rolls back some of the dietary restrictions that were put in place and says that was that was a prior thing, new covenant, different rules. So with the exception of some Old Testament principles, I would say that properly understood, which of course is a loaded term, that if Jesus said it, or if the Old Testament said it and it wasn't rolled back by God himself because it was local, then you've got to follow it. And that's something that is, tune in next time. But yeah, that would be my short answer, indeed.
All right, good.
Well, thank you so much again. I've really enjoyed, once again, our conversation. Thank you for your patience and time. It's
Absolutely.
really a pleasure. So I'm going to cut off the recording.